What if I were to tell you that the Detroit Lions had a third-year playmaker going into his third year of NFL play, and throughout his first two seasons as a tight end in the NFL, has never dropped a pass? Not only that, but this tight end has never had a targeted pass at him that did not result in a catch in a gain of positive yardage. You would assume that that player is one of the best young players at his position, or that that player did not exist at all. However, that fits James Mitchell to a T, and despite his statistical anomaly of never having a target not be caught, James Mitchell has seen very reduced time for the Detroit Lions offense and very rarely, if ever, gets talked about by the fans or the media covering Detroit. However, I think with his blend of skills, with his versatility, his verticality in the passing attack, and his strong hands, that James Mitchell could be a true receiving threat for the Detroit Lions offense this season and could finally take that next step in year three under Ben Johnson. Now, James Mitchell coming out of college was a really strong tight end prospect. He played 4 years in the ACC as a Virginia Tech Hokie, and although the volume wasn't necessarily there for a top tight end prospect, the efficiency numbers and just his raw yards per reception were not going to be denied. His sophomore year did not see him have a ton of receptions, about just 2 per game. However, in those 13 games that he played as a sophomore, James Mitchell had 21 receptions for 361 yards and 2 touchdowns through the year, averaging 17.4 yards per catch, as well as having 4 touchdowns on the ground as a rusher. He was a versatile piece in the Virginia Tech offense, and in his first real taste of gameplay, James Mitchell showed that he could be an explosive and a dynamic weapon for a Power 5 team. And although, again, the volume wasn't there, the big plays and the efficiency was certainly something that caught a lot of eyes. He followed that up with a junior season where he played 10 games, had 26 receptions for 435 yards and 4 touchdowns, as well as another rushing touchdown on the ground, finishing his junior year with 16.7 yards per reception with a little bit higher volume and better touchdown production through the air. Now, unfortunately, going into his senior year, James Mitchell tore his ACL just 2 games into the NFL season, meaning he didn't really get a chance to finish off his collegiate career very strong. And he finished his collegiate career with less than 1,000 receiving yards, less than 10 receiving touchdowns. But due to his size, his speed, his verticality, and his versatility, there were a lot of NFL GMs that felt like even though his rookie year might be a little bit of a flop, that James Mitchell could turn into a really strong receiving threat and could be a tight end that could play and impact an NFL offense. Now, as James Mitchell was injured through the pre-draft process, he did not have an RAS score. He went through the measurements and actually did do the bench press where he put up 18 reps on a torn ACL. But James Mitchell went through, he measured at 6'4", 250 pounds for a tight end, which again, the weight was probably just a little bit high and he probably wasn't in the best football shape because he tore his ACL and he wasn't really healthy enough to train for the combine or anything like that. So he didn't do any athletic testing, did not have an RAS score, but watching the film and then measuring in at 6'4", 250 did do James Mitchell quite a few favors, and he was a player that was on quite a few draft boards going into the NFL draft. Now, James Mitchell ended up being the 5th round selection of the Detroit Lions in 2022. A 5th round flyer that they felt was a player that probably wasn't going to play right away, which was kind of the theme of 2022, but a player that could eventually develop into a good passing attack, could eventually develop into a strong pass catcher, and a guy that could stretch the field vertically for the Detroit Lions at the tight end position. Now, James Mitchell did have a slow start to his NFL career, but as a rookie did play in 16 games for the Detroit Lions and did make an impact. In fact, as a rookie, James Mitchell was targeted 11 times, had 11 receptions for 113 yards, as well as a touchdown, while averaging 10.3 yards per catch. Now, this is not a large sample size for James Mitchell, and it's not a large sample size to say, oh, it was a super successful rookie season, but being a 5th round tight end rookie at a position that typically takes a couple of years to develop, there were some very encouraging signs, and there was a lot of things that made people believe that, hey, maybe James Mitchell could be the vertical threat going forward and could develop into a top tier target for Jared Goff in 2024. Now, the Detroit Lions went on to draft Sam Laporta in the 2023 draft in the second round, and of course, we all know how that turned out. And James Mitchell kind of took a back seat from his receiving role in 2022. In the preseason, James Mitchell was targeted 7 times, having 6 receptions for 75 yards, having a really strong preseason, showing that he could be that security blanket, showing the strong hands, and showing a lot of yard after catch ability. And then he went into the 2023 season where he did play 15 games for the Detroit Lions, was targeted just twice, but had 2 receptions for 28 yards and 14 yards per reception, meaning through his 2 years of NFL career, James Mitchell has 13 targets for 13 receptions and close to 150 yards receiving. And if you include the preseason, James Mitchell has been targeted well over 20 times, having just 1 catch not go his way. And it wasn't even a catchable ball that did not hit him in the hands. James Mitchell has been as reliable as they come when he has been targeted. And when you look at these statistics and you say, okay, this is a guy who literally has never dropped the ball in the NFL and has only had catches go his way when targeted, you would think that, okay, maybe that guy deserves a little bit more time. Pair that with the fact that he's 6'4", runs in the low 4.5s, if not high 4.4s, is super athletic, a very fluid receiver, and can create some vertical separation. You would think that James Mitchell would be a tight end that the Lions would want to lean on and want to get involved a little bit more throughout the offense. However, that just doesn't seem to be the case, as throughout last season, Sam Laporta, of course, took the most snaps at tight end with 981. Brock Wright, despite the injuries, took the second most snaps with 423, with James Mitchell bringing up third place with just 157 snaps across the 15 games that he played, with Anthony Frisker officially taking 2 snaps in the regular season. Now, Sam Laporta is an all-pro. Brock Wright is a great tight end too, and I think James Mitchell is a super versatile and very athletic field-stretching tight end 3, but realistically, Ben Johnson, despite how much he likes the 12 personnel sets with 1 running back and 2 tight ends, he really doesn't ever have a 13 personnel. Very rarely do the Detroit Lions have 3 tight ends on the field, and with Sam Laporta being an all-pro receiver, with Brock Wright being a better all-around tight end and blocker, that leaves a very specialized role for James Mitchell, kind of within the void of, hey, you know, if we need a second really good pure receiving tight end, that could be you. But considering Brock Wright is not as far from a liability as a receiver, there just really isn't a whole lot of opportunity for James Mitchell to be put on the field and put in situations to succeed. Not only that, but taking a look at the rest of the Detroit Lions offense, you have Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, as well as Sam Laporta, Brock Wright, and last year, Josh Reynolds on top of your all-pro Amon-Ra St. Brown. At best, James Mitchell is the 9th best receiving option for a team that is already one of the best passing attacks in the NFL. And this year, bringing in Donovan Peoples-Jones, that role is probably not going to change. So why do I think that James Mitchell could have a successful year with the Detroit Lions? And why do I think that he could potentially be a player that the Lions lean on in 2024? Well, James Mitchell, as we talked about, has the tools to succeed. He's a great receiver, has yak ability, has strong hands, but again, isn't really the guy that's going to get those targets. He is kind of in that Antoine Green range where he is going to be a backup. He is going to be a depth piece and probably isn't going to see very many targets in 2024 unless the Detroit Lions play him at fullback. Now, that might seem a little bit out of nowhere. That might seem like a suggestion that, doesn't have a lot of merit to it. But considering the fact that James Mitchell did play fullback for the Detroit Lions a year ago, shows that he was earning his spot on the field one way or another, and that the Detroit Lions did want to put James Mitchell on the field in some form of capacity. Being 6'4", 250 pounds, James Mitchell has the size and the strength to be a at least decent run blocker and get in the way to open up holes for the running attack of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And of course, if he's sent out of the backfield, he would be a phenomenal, if not one of the best receiving fullbacks in the NFL. Now, I know that the fullback is a dying position. I know that realistically, there's maybe 2 or 3 true fullbacks left in the NFL. So being a top 5 fullback really isn't that difficult. However, taking a look at James Mitchell a year ago, that's where the Detroit Lions played him. And I could potentially see James Mitchell in a very similar role to what the San Francisco 49ers do with Kyle Juszczyk, right? A player that can line up in the backfield, that's big and heavy, and a guy that can run block pretty well, but also a really fluid receiver out of the backfield that would typically get matched up versus lesser linebackers, that would typically get matched up versus, not necessarily having a great matchup for him and being a mismatch pretty much all over the field. And James Mitchell could be that mismatch, right? 6'4" is going to outsize a lot of cornerbacks, right? 250 is going to be too heavy for a lot of cornerbacks. His size is going to, at his size, his speed is going to be too much for a lot of linebackers to cover. And again, his size is too big for a lot of safeties. So considering he would be potentially the fullback within the Detroit Lions offense, he would get a lot of free releases off the line, wouldn't get any attention paid to him at all. But just like Kyle Juszczyk could be a useful receiving option, could be a useful run blocker, can really just play that role. And I know that they also put Malcolm Rodriguez there as a former linebacker, but I think James Mitchell makes a lot more sense. I think James Mitchell, of course, is bigger than Malcolm Rodriguez, which will allow him to run block a little bit better, but also is a much more fluid wide receiver than Malcolm Rodriguez is at the fullback position. So going through the last kind of couple weeks of the season, the Lions did implement this a little bit. We saw him at fullback versus the Cowboys. We saw him at fullback versus the Minnesota Vikings both times around, as well as a couple of other games when he was healthy. And unfortunately, throughout the playoffs, they kind of lost that role as James Mitchell went down with a season-ending injury. But when he comes back, I wouldn't be surprised if they made a full-time conversion to tight end / tight end 3, right? So fullback / tight end 3, meaning he could be a guy that lines up at tight end, but also could get more work at that position and potentially be a matchup nightmare and a versatile tool for the Ben Johnson offense. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Just wanted to bring light to still a very young, very talented, good receiving threat for the Detroit Lions. And in an offense with so much firepower and so much explosiveness, James Mitchell typically gets swept under the rug. And for a player that has quite literally never had a target not be a catch, I think that is something that needs to be talked about. So with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions about James Mitchell potentially as a tight end, potentially moving to fullback, or what his role could be in 2024 that we didn't talk about. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please go down below and do so. We are shooting for 4,100 subscribers by the end of July, by the start of Detroit Lions training camp, and you could help us get there sooner rather than later. But with all of that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.